A Hermit in the Himalayas, Chapter 3, by Paul Brunton. Late in the afternoon, I return up the steep gradient to my sanctuary. The hill stick serves its purpose well, even if it's not so perfect as a regular mountain staff with iron-pointed tip. I pick out a spot where I may sit down and think quietly as a prelude to the inner stillness which I hope to invoke with the eventide. I take my seat close to the very edge of the cliff, for thence one can look down into the great valley and see most of its sublime grandeur. The place suggests cloistral peace. If serenity can be attained anywhere on earth, this is indeed one region among the few. This unspoilt border state where the ancient Hindu gods have walked seems quite apart from the rest of India. My gaze comes to rest at last upon the curving branches of a lofty deodar, whose aged trunk is heavily covered with brownish-green dank moss, and with long tufts of ragged lichen like a beard. It grows but a few feet away from and below my seat, and leans forward at a slight angle from the cliffside. The sunbeams filter through its foliage. There is not very regular, symmetrical growth of the branches as with pine trees, and the clustered needles which form the foliage droop sadly towards the ground. Nevertheless, there is quite an air of faded aristocracy about the old dark tree, while its leaves still waft the peculiar fragrance which betrays its primal relationship with the Syrian cedar. I remember that the Mughal emperors used the wood of deodar trees to heat the water for their baths, and for their baths of their harem favorites, because of its unusual scent. 2 tiny mountain flowers kiss the venerable foot of the deodar with its fresh young petals. Most spiritual of all trees, legend makes the deodar the favorite of the gods. I fancy that we shall get to know each other very well, this tall, graceful deodar and myself, and even attain an intimacy of firm friendship, which my inevitable departure one day shall be unable to break. At any rate, we must henceforth companion each other for a long time, for such are the dictates of destiny. I shall whisper my heart-hidden secrets to you, O patriarchal deodar, and tell of those vanished joys and terrible tribulations which a man can never commit to public gaze, writer though he be. And you, too, shall speak to me, albeit in tones so low that the world will sneeringly say that I am deluding myself, but we shall both laugh pityingly at the world and forgive it, because we know well that although nature is the common mother of us all, the world still remains darkly ignorant of her tightly held secret. My thoughts drift back to sultry India, to the land which I have left behind, in the cities of the distant plains, where one's hand, placed upon a stone parapet in the sun, has to be hastily withdrawn, so scorched is it, and where the few white, sun-stewed men who cannot escape from feet-imprisoned duties are reeling under the haze of summer heat and being pestered by voracious mosquitoes. The stress of political agitation has temporarily diminished, because it is difficult to work up enthusiasm for far-off ideals in a temperature of 110, no matter how much you fancy yourself to be an idealist. The mystery and meaning of the British conquest of India is something that no Briton and no Indian has ever explained satisfactorily, because none has ever examined it with inner vision, but without racial prejudice. I think that if the British rule is as black as it is painted by many Indians, emigration is the only resource for them. I equally think, however, that if the subject race is such a difficult one as is painted by the British officials, emigration is the only thing for them too. Time alone, through the amplitude of its perspective, may help both to understand why this huge subcontinent was the meeting place of such widely different races. Life is unlikely to have thrown two people across each other's path in this strange manner without some purpose. Have they a service to render each other? The couple of centuries during which Western civilization has been lapping at the shores of India must be rounded out by a couple of decades, more before the world shall see the answer. Meanwhile, politicians have created a new profession for young educated India, and the cry for independence, for the British authority to leave the shores of their country, makes itself vociferously heard wherever they foregather. The young cultured Hindu who dresses like the moderns but thinks like the ancients is fast disappearing. The trouser which he wears today becomes a symbol of the titillation to which he is subjecting his religion, his government, his customs, and his environment. On the other side, in the military cantonments and civilian clubs, in the red sandstone buildings of the government secretariat at New Delhi, scornful Anglo-Saxons, with all the stubborn courage of their race, are determined to hold the bridge during their generation anyway. Destiny, as usual, will have the last word to say in the matter. She will write her own solutions, which, upon her dark, mysterious scroll, again as usual, will be the wisest. Time's the king of men, says wise Shakespeare. He's both their parent, and he is their grave, and he gives them what he will, not what they crave. End quote. For there is a higher power which overrules the ambitions and aspirations of men. I possess my own prophetic anticipations of what's going to happen in India, but in a world where national and racial prejudice is king, it's not always tactful to tell the truth. I do not wear, and I do not want to wear, any political label. It is true that to be unlabeled nowadays is deemed heresy, and weakness is to invite neglect. But to don the prophet's mantle is full of danger. Both Britisher and Indian would mistake and narrow down my attitude, and certainly misunderstand my prediction. Therefore, it's better to bide my time and keep silent. Meanwhile, I want to see East and West appreciate each other more, and I try in my humble way to be a harbinger of goodwill between both. Why should I waste my time with millions in railing and ranting against the defects of established society? Rather, should I do a little constructive work? There is another risk for me should I venture to make political prophecies in this country, which seethes with Oriental intrigue and suspicion. I am reminded of a little-known incident of the last war as I think of this danger. That much admired, much maligned, and much misunderstood man, the late Colonel T.E. Lawrence, reached a critical period of his campaign in Arabia, encountering stubborn obstacles that were not to be overcome easily. But by a flash of his famous genius, he hit on a novel idea of sending a request to London for professional stage magicians to be sent out to travel among the tribes on the border of the Red Sea and Mediterranean. They were to be, if possible, of Arab birth themselves and familiar with the customs and beliefs of the tribesmen. Their work was to pose as native, wandering fakirs, to perform magical feats and thus gain a reputation for their supernatural powers. On the strength of this reputation, they were to assume the gift of prophecy and predict the sensational defeat of the Turks, thus inducing the Arabs to throw in their lot with the British. 5 men were accordingly sent out to the Near East on this mission, 3 being of Arab birth, 1 an Arab-speaking Frenchman, and 1 an Arab-speaking Englishman, specially trained in stage magic for this part. They did good work for Lawrence and helped influence many Arabs, but the Frenchman and another member of the party were detected and paid the penalty of their lives. Not that there is any real end to the turbulence of political clashes and the harassments of racial differences. We shall have a pacified world when we have pacified hearts, not before. The ancient sages who gave this simple formula to mankind are nowadays denounced as impractical idealists. But if the final test of a policy is its results in material affairs, we must confess that this peaceless world has not improved on them. The spiritual emptiness of our epoch and the poverty of our inner resources expresses themselves clearly enough in the chaos, the distress we see everywhere around us, and the dolorous servitude which we give to unworthy ideals and unworthy men. The world's development of egotism and intellect has given it a fictitious sense of practical wisdom, but the sages who spoke to former times spoke out of a knowledge of humanity's history, profounder and more accurate than any which our book-delving historians can ever hope to have. For the paltry few thousand years which we can record, and that with much guesswork, represent but the tail end of mankind's lengthy past. When a man, he never pretended to be anything more than that, like Buddha, proclaims and reproclaims that, quote, hatred ceases not by hatred, hatred ceases only by love, end quote. He is not a mere sentimentalist idealist voicing his well-meaning but futile emotions. He is every whit as practical as the businessman who keeps his ears glued to the telephone and his eyes on the papers on the desk. For Buddha, like all great sages of his status, sees the pitiful tangle of wars without end that dismayed the prehistoric epoch, as it has dismayed the historic epoch. He sees these things in universal vision of the planet's past, which the gods hold before him as a mirror, and he has shown how the threads of cause and effect in humanity's affairs are tied by invisible hands in such a way that an inescapable justice and equalizing readjustment is forever at work. He sees too that a spiritual power is back of the universe, whose expression in one form is sublime benevolence, and that this power is eternal. He knows that hatred brings pain, both to the hated and the hater, and that, therefore, both hatred and its corollary of suffering can never cease until benevolence takes its place. And because the power which prompts us ultimately to practice benevolence is an eternal one, and above all an inescapable one, he preaches the advisability of yielding to it now, and thus saving much needless suffering. Is he or the hater unpractical? Precisely the same vision of life is given to Jesus. In a world of dry formalists and barren regionalists, No. And barren religionists, given over to the doctrine of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, Jesus condenses and reaffirms this truth. He too is shown the vision of the universe and the laws which secretly govern the beings who dwell upon it. Not for nothing has he disappeared into the mountains, where he sits in the paralyzed immobility of meditation, and not long after his return he rebukes the visionless Pharisees and heals the man with the withered hand. He says in impassioned and inspired words to the multitude which he has gathered around him, quote, "Bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you." Let me start this over again. Bless them that curse you and all right, one more time. Bless them that curse you and pray for them which despitefully use you. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. For with the same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. End quote. He knows, but the world of surface-seeing men does not know, does not understand, and so blunders on its blind, pain-bringing way. Bitter antagonisms will yield to wise cooperation only when this unwritten law is understood, that whatever a man does towards another is ultimately reflected back to him from some source or other. Universal benevolence is therefore the wisest and most sensible policy. In this troubled age, it is our immediate and intimate concern. Yet, who wants moralizings and preachings today? They can only earn an easy laugh against me. It's futile to preach to the converted, for those who believe these things do not need to be told, while those who lack the faith will not listen anyway. Destiny will take charge of the nations and teach them what they need to learn. The most practical course is open to me, therefore, to concentrate my energies in direction and direct my attention into a channel where they can be most economically used. Such a channel exists in myself. The best starting point from which to reform the world is undoubtedly my own self. The best way to spread the spirit of benevolence is to begin with myself. Let me then compose my thoughts and silently repeat the Buddhist formula for world well-being, whose spirit, if not, whose words is. Quote, to the four quarters of the world I send compassion. To the north, south, east, and west, above and below, I send compassion. To all living creatures upon the earth, I send compassion. End quote. My mind softly dwells upon this gentle theme. The emotion of pity passes through me, and when the final benedictory word is pronounced, I feel less blessed myself. No, I feel no less blessed myself. The face of one of my bitterest critics rises suddenly before me. I hear her speak her acidulous words as plainly as though she were physically present, yet I am aware she is in a different continent. Knowing what I know and keeping my secrets well, I generally refuse to dally words with misunderstanding in whatever garb it appears, and pass it by with silent indifference. But today I smile forgivingly at her lack of comprehension, and I wish her well. I gaze into her eyes, and I bid her bitter soul find truth, and with it sweetness and light. 3 times I bless her, and then impose a psychic wall between me and her thoughts. A dragonfly glides by me on gossamer wings. And now the chilling of the air with which preludes dusk warns me to cease my meditations and to match my physical stillness with a mental one. I look around. The sun has begun to dip behind the mountains, which lose their warm flush and return to shadowed pallor. I sit in rigid repose, and while I let the world drift slowly out of the field of awareness, the while I turn attention inwards. Somewhere within me dwells the Overself, the eternal essence, that divine being whence I draw my life force. Be still, my master has adjured me, and then you will know the Overself, for God and the Overself are as one. My breathing slows. For a minute I fix all my attention upon the movement of the respiration. The effect of controlling it purposely is to bring the in and out breaths into rhythm, into cadence and quieter activity, gentler and less abundant. The brain is like a wheel which endlessly revolves, picking up fresh thoughts with every revolution. Now I watch the wheel slow down. The more I hold to my resolve to press attention deeply inward towards a central point, the more my thoughts diminish in frequency and length. I know that I may find in this repose of the intellect a way towards wisdom. I remember what a powerful yogi teacher, of whose attainments I possess an extremely high opinion, once said to me. He lives in a little room inside an ancient and picturesque temple. Whilst I sit chairless on the floor, he reclines with half-closed eyes upon a cotton-covered bench from which he seldom moves. We are talking about the difficulty which beginners experience when attempting to learn how to concentrate the mind. The adept remarks, quote, "If we assume that the average number of thoughts which pass through a man's brain during a given period is 100, and if he succeeds in reducing it by constant practice in regulation to 80, then we may say he has gained the power of concentration of mind to the extent of 20%. Therefore, the most direct way to obtain such concentrated power is to practice the lessening of the number of one's thoughts. And with the slower working of my mind, yet all attention, not a whit less alert, I begin to feel a profounder peace enveloping me. The prolonged concentration of thought has ultimately induced a finer state to arise inside. How sorry I feel for the city dwellers who are subject to turmoil without end. Why should they make the intellect supreme? Yet their way of escape cannot inwardly be different from mine. Minds exasperated by the inevitable frictions and disappointments of daily life may find in the respite gained by mental quiet a soothing and healing serenity that will anoint their wounded nerves with balm. The intellect is but an instrument and not the essential being of man. It is not self-sustained. It is an automatic and routine faculty. Excuse me. Modern man represents the triumph of mechanistic intellect over mere instinct, just as future man will represent the triumph of divine intuition over mere intellect. Reason, which may be a good guide at times, may also be our betrayer at other times. Not always by prudent forethought may we best be led, and also by the spontaneous upwelling of inspiration. Reason is purely arithmetical, whereas intuition is an unfoldment from we know not where. The advance of intuition upon our thought is not mathematically measurable. It enters the brain unannounced, as by a private door. It's not a thought, but an influx from a superior realm which seeps into thought. It's not an emotion, unless indeed it be emotion utterly purified from the personal. But alas, most of us attach little or no importance to the faint heralds of dawning intuition. The comparative stillness which surrounds me now may not be, nay, it is not, the utter stillness which I long to attain. For not a few slow-walking thoughts contrive to meander around inside the emptied halls of my brain. To be really still is to be centered. Nevertheless, I shall be contented with it today and not attempt to cross the mystic frontier. I know that these intruders are alien to the essential being of man. I know that when all thoughts are let go, when they die off like lotus flowers in midwinter, the divine reality begins to arise. The mere resolve and consequent effort to turn one's attention inwards immediately arouses them to a fierce struggle for their own existence. Their grip on man is more tenacious than he normally realizes, for it is the result of long hereditary ingrained habit, passed down through the race. They hold him mercilessly, enslave him in a manner which he rarely understands, and deprive him of the liberty that already exists in his unknown inmost nature. I have watched in myself the processes by which thought moves, and I have discovered them to be mechanical. I have come to the Himalayas to declare future war on these invisible antagonists. Not that I can keep them at bay when I set out determinedly to do so. Not that I am unaware of those theoretical and practical secrets whose application may give me a good victory. Not that I even lack powerful personal aid in these undertakings. But I have kept these invaders at bay only for a time. Whilst my victories have never given me more than a temporary respite, such is their ancestral power over man. The spiritual summit of my life has yet to be attained. The time has come, however, to stage another pitched and continuous battle with them until one or the other combatant retires from the field. No better setting for this battle may be found than these remote and lonely Himalayan wilds. In none of the many countries which I have visited, for I only feel at home when I am abroad, have I found an atmosphere so conducive towards spiritual tranquilization as in these mountains, to which my destiny has finally brought me. Here, best of all, one can realize, make real, the saying of the psalmist, "Be still and know that I am God." No better method may be practiced, for me at any rate, than sitting down and being still. No government permit is necessary to enter the divine domain, which lies just beyond the Himalayan barrier of intellect. No greater help is procurable from men than that which has been promised me by my Master. His power is such, I know, that the 2,000 miles or less between us dwindle to a mere 2 feet at his will. What more can I require? But the shadows of twilight have crept in the sanctuary, like a shy maiden creeping into her lover's house. Even the pink afterglow of sunset has disappeared. Day has wearied, and soon the starlight will kiss the summits to sleep. What, I wonder, is the mysterious quality in dayfall which makes it so attractive to me? Why, when all the great teachers and the great yogis of the past counsel men to meditate at daybreak, do I follow my own instinct and select the opposite pole of the day for my favorite period of mental quiet? Every scientific fact, every esoteric principle, every rational argument is on their side, yet dusk is the hour that helps me most. I must accept the beauteous revelation which comes at this still hour, and not be a mere copier of others. The twilight, then, shall one day provide my destined moment of final liberation. The exile has begun his homeward journey. I rise, for it is time to return to my forest-embowered bungalow.